It is Wednesday, the 4th of July, 2018, and this is 3000 NFL Mock Draft, a Seattle Seahawks podcast with myself, Kenneth Arthur of Field Goals, and Rob Staten of Seahawks Draft Blog. And that's right, we are recording this on the 4th of July. For me, I need some sort of excuse as to why I'm not out there at the beaches, at a party, at a barbecue. Why am I sitting in my home at 3:45 recording a Seahawks podcast? Well, those are questions that even if you have, and you want answers to, what's wrong with Kenneth? Why doesn't he have something to do at a day like this? Well, I have those same questions, but, that's something that I have to work out personally with others, with professional help, talk it out, figure those kinds of things out. But it's also because I love keeping up to date with this podcast. We want to push it every week and make sure that we're getting it done. But for Rob, he doesn't have to worry about a holiday because over here, we're celebrating breaking away from, the British colonies and the UK. We're celebrating. And Rob, I assume on your side, a day of mourning.
No, not at all. We're celebrating as well, Kenny. Today's a great day of celebration in England because of the World Cup. England won a World Cup game last night against Colombia on penalty shootout. So I guess you could call this our Independence Day because we won on pens against Colombia. So yeah, everyone's really celebrating that. England have got a game against Sweden on Saturday to get to the semi-finals. And everybody's, if people want to get a flavour of what it's like in England when England are playing in the World Cup and doing fairly well, then you need to go onto Twitter and type in the hashtag It's Coming Home, and you will see the wild celebrations. I promise you will have not seen anything quite like a big bunch of England football fans, and the whole country is an England football fan right now. You will have never seen celebrations quite like last night. So I would urge people to go and see that because it's really fun and it's just an incredible time to be in this country.
It's coming home. Hashtag It's Coming Home. And for someone like me who only follows the American football, what is exactly England's chances to get to those semifinals and keep going?
So they've got a decent chance. They haven't got a really great team or anything. It's just that they are a team. And the draw has strangely opened up for England. So on one side of the draw, for example, France and Brazil could play each other. Belgium are a decent team, and Uruguay, they're in one side of the draw. And England are in a side of the draw with Sweden, Croatia, and the hosts Russia. And none of those three teams are particularly good. I mean, they'll be feeling the same way, that they've all got a very good chance of getting to the final as well. I'm trying to think of a comparison, Kenny, between England potentially making a World Cup final this year, and I think it'd be something akin to maybe the Cleveland Browns getting to the Super Bowl, or was it the Chicago Cubs? My baseball knowledge is pretty limited. They won the World Series recently after a long historical run without winning it. I think it'd be something similar to that, but with respect to the people of Chicago, if England were to win the World Cup or even get to the final, the celebrations and the partying and the scenes in England will be a bajillion times bigger than they were when they won that World Series.
Is it tough to bring we could talk about the larger picture of sports and how they bring people together, and root for one thing at a time like in England, in the UK or however it works. I guess you've got different parts. Just help explain maybe to me, does it, when you spend so much of your time sort of hating each other, what's it like when you come together and root for one team?
It's incredible. It's like nothing else you could possibly experience in sports, when everybody just puts to one side all the rivalries, all the hatred, and just comes together as one. I think that the great thing about this particular run at the World Cup, and why I think everybody really wants it to continue, and I'm worried that we're talking a lot about the World Cup and not the Seahawks, and people might be switching off, but we'll get onto the Seahawks in a second. But the great thing is that in the UK, I don't know if people are aware that we've had this big Brexit thing going on for a couple of years now, and that has really divided the country. Half of the country wanted to leave the EU, half didn't. It's created this real split between the country. There are issues going on in England, as there are in all of countries at the moment, and things politically that people are either very happy with or very unhappy with. And something like this just brings everybody together. Everybody right now, we're having some fantastic weather in the UK. We've got England doing well at the World Cup. There's just a real positive vibe around the country, and I really hope that it's going to continue for another week, because they play again on Saturday, and then potentially if they were to win that semi-final in the week. And I really hope that this happens, because it's just such a positive thing. And like I say, go and check out the hashtag It's Coming Home, all in one word on the hashtag, and you will see some of the partying and the celebration and the memes that people are creating around England's run at the World Cup, and it's just really incredible.
Absolutely. And yeah, we're going to get to the Seahawks. I hope you guys feel confident that eventually at some point we do get to the Seattle Seahawks, and we can do that right now. The big news this week is Kam Chancellor basically announcing his retirement. Cannot officially, retire for real, because then he would be forfeiting a lot of guaranteed money over the next 2 years, that will, certainly the Seahawks will look at and cringe a little bit for the fact that they are paying him so much money, and knowing that it's all coming on an extension that they gave him last year, of which they will, never get a snap of with those extra years given to Kam Chancellor. But you can also go back to the origins of Kam Chancellor as a draft pick in 2010 in the 5th round. The other safety drafted that year along with Earl Thomas didn't play a lot as a rookie. And then in 2011, I think Kam Chancellor really started to become the backbone, or the piece that held everyone together, I think, in a certain way. The bridge between Pete Carroll and some of the players. I think Kam Chancellor served that role, and also just a very intimidating person and player for 5-6 years there, and really certainly I think the MVP of the Seahawks playoff run in 2013. I think he was their best player in their Super Bowl run that postseason, and now officially, Kam Chancellor not going to be a part of the Seahawks defense anymore. It's something that a lot of people had been expecting as a foregone conclusion, and that Bradley McDougald would have to take over that role if Earl Thomas is still around. Then if Earl Thomas isn't around, then McDougald maybe has to move to free safety, and they're looking for a strong safety. But Rob, when it comes to Kam Chancellor and the 7 or 8 seasons that he played with Seattle Seahawks, what will you most remember, and what will the Seahawks as a defense, as someone who was there up until last November and was still playing at a high level, what will they be missing next season without Kam Chancellor?
Well, I have so many thoughts about this, Kenny, and stop me if I end up rambling a little bit, because I just, for me, Kam Chancellor is just one of the finest football players that will ever play for the Seahawks. And people are going to remember the big hits. They're going to remember, the hit on Demaryius Thomas, of course, the Vernon Davis hits, plural. It wasn't just that one in 2012. It was many hits against him. There was just just the ability of Kam to line up on the field and the other team be instantly intimidated is just, in a game like football, which is so based on physicality, that to have that presence on the field, just stalking around, if you're a receiver running across the middle, even running backs, the way that he destroyed Eric Winston, there was a tackle in that Arizona game. It's just one of the great plays that's the great thing about this Pete Carroll era. And this is why I hope that people over time are going to stop obsessing over that one play in the Super Bowl that they lost, which, do you know what? We're never going to get over that. I get that. As Seahawks fans, we're never going to be able to get over that play. But do you know what? Think of all the many, many more magical moments that the Pete Carroll era has provided for us as fans to enjoy. We have had a lifetime of memories in these 7 or 8 years with Pete Carroll and with Kam Chancellor that fans of other teams are just never going to have. We've lived the dream, really, as fans of a football team this year. And do you know what? It would have been nice if they won 2 or 3 more titles, but ultimately we got to live through this. We got to root for these guys. And I think Kam and his ability back there, he was a great football player. He studied. He got great skill as a safety. He was very aware of what the opponent was going to do. He just made some great plays. It wasn't just the hits. Think of the interception, the pick 6 against Cam Newton in that game in the playoffs in 2014, and running it back for a touchdown. At that moment, as he's running down the other end of the field, you knew the Seahawks had won that game and how fantastic that feeling was when he ran that in. And you think of him leaping over the line of scrimmage that 2 or 3 times he did in that game before halftime as well. And you just think of the interception in the NFC Championship in 2013, when the Seahawks, I think they'd just blown the opportunity on the 1 yard line and Marshawn Lynch had fumbled it. It's when Navarro Bowman had that very sad knee injury. And then you think, what a missed opportunity. And then immediately Kam Chancellor, it picks off Colin Kaepernick and it's another opportunity. And they're going to put 3 points on the board. And that ended up being enough for them because they couldn't get the touchdown in the end, San Francisco. And you just think of the great memories of that. And for me, Cam, I'll finish with this to answer your question, Kenny. For me, I think there has been, obviously the Seahawks have many great players in this Pete Carroll era, and you know, this is not a slur on Earl Thomas or Bobby Wagner or Doug Baldwin or people like that. But I think that the 3 players that teams will have really coveted, you know, other fans, general managers, coaches, the 3 that they'll have really coveted over the last few years are Russell Wilson, of course, because he's Russell Wilson. He plays quarterback. You know, everybody wants a fantastic quarterback, and Russell has got that. He's a magical playmaker. I think Marshawn Lynch, because of the way that he set the tone and was just, I mean, how the hell do you prepare to play Marshawn Lynch and just opens up your whole offense because you've got someone like Beast Mode running the football. And the other player they would have really coveted is Kam Chancellor for his leadership, for his dynamism, for his physicality, his intimidation. Football's a physical game. Personally, Kenny, I know there's a lot of people out there that love spread offense and schemes and stuff like that who'd rather watch a Tom Brady offense or an Aaron Rodgers type offense. For me, I like to watch Pete Carroll style football, which is we're going to beat you up on defense. We're not just going to beat you, we're going to beat you up, and we're going to play physical, and we're going to run the ball. And I love that. I think it's more fun watching a team that wins that way than watching a team that throws it 500 times a game and just puts points on the board and has to outscore teams. I like that physical aspect of this game. It is what separates it from other sports. It's what makes it unique and different. And Kam Chancellor summed everything up about the physical side of American football. And for me, it's a really sad day, but time for some new heroes to emerge. Time for some new guys to step up to the plate. Very few people knew who Kam Chancellor was in 2010 when he was a 5th round pick. Time for the next batch of really good, talented young players to step forward and take their chance.
Yeah, and speaking of some of those young players, you know, I think that there's going to be certainly a lot of focus on the safeties and the secondary in general going into, you know, training camp and the preseason. How do you feel about the progress or potential? You know, we're now a year after the drafting of Delano Hill and Tedrick Thompson, and you know, I think a lot of people mostly think about Delano Hill. So as far as the next phase goes, we're going to need to see, or, you know, coaches are going to need to see. We don't need to see anything, you know, as people that are not affiliated with the progress of the team. I would want to make sure it's all clear, you know, but that anything can happen and a player can be a disappointment to us as fans, and that's totally okay. But as far as Delano Hill goes, I know that there has been disappointment that Hill and Thompson couldn't do more, despite the fact that, you know, they're playing on a really talented defense, and there was no reason that they should have been playing last year. But with that being said, you know, Delano Hill going into his 2nd year and Tedrick Thompson, any thoughts on where these safeties could be progress-wise, or where they would need to be by the training camp, or just any inclination of how you think they will do?
Well, I certainly liked Tedrick Thompson a lot when he was at Colorado. For me, it was very obvious that he didn't have the speed of someone like Earl Thomas, but he still played in that same kind of way. He was a rangy safety at Colorado, had multiple interceptions. One of the great things I loved about Earl Thomas when he was at Texas coming into the league, Kenny, is that he had 8 interceptions going into the NFL. So he got the production there. He was taking the football away. And Tedrick Thompson did exactly the same thing. I wrote extensively about him before that draft and was really pleased that the Seahawks valued him, I think, even as just like a 2nd round type player. I think they said that afterwards. And to get him in the early 4th round, I thought was tremendous value. I think that people have maybe been a little bit too swayed by that play. I think it was against the Chargers, I want to say, in preseason a year ago, when he just completely misread the play and got burnt on a deep ball. And I think people have let that stick in their mind a little bit too much, that they've not been able to move on from that and say, this was a rookie player in, I think, what was his first preseason game, making a big mistake. that's when you want them to make their mistakes. You just want to see them learn from it. So I think going into the preseason next month, you just want to see people like Tedrick Thompson eliminate that from their game, show some playmaking quality, show the ability that they've taken a step forward after a year. Same with Delano Hill, who we saw very little of. I think that the concerning thing for both of them is that they weren't talked about that much last year. There wasn't this constant Pete Carroll saying, hey, keep an eye on these two guys. They're really coming up strong. That we're going to get them involved in one way or the other. And we're really excited about these guys, because they were saying that about Cam in 2010. Even though Cam wasn't playing, he was mainly special teams. There was this kind of momentum about Kam Chancellor that they really liked him. And then by 2011, he became the heart and soul of the team. And you kind of want to hear positive things. Pete Carroll will let you know who he's excited about. A year ago, it was Chris Carson. Nobody was hiding that they were excited about Chris Carson. You want to hear positive things. And I think it's a big year for the whole 2017 class, because Pete Carroll and John Schneider they were very excited about the 2016 draft. They've not got a great deal out of it. Jermaine Ifedi's going to probably start. Jaron Reed's going to start. And hopefully those two guys can take steps forward. But they've not got a great deal out of Procise because of the injuries. Nick Vanette's not been able to take a step forward. Odiambo hasn't. Quinton Jefferson's been okay. Alex Collins is in Baltimore. So they've not got a great deal out of that class in the end, even though they were excited about it. And here's this 2017 class, big year for so many of these guys. Ethan Posick, can he start? Is they're going to bring in J.R. Sweezy? Is there going to be even more competition there for him? Is that something they're going to look at? Can Shaquille Griffin be Seattle's number one corner? He's no longer the guy who's learning across from Richard Sherman. He has to be the guy now, along with Byron Maxwell. He's going to have to. He played well last year. He's going to have to take a step forward again. We need more than one interception from him next season. So he's going to have to take a step forward. You want to see Delano. You want to see Tedrick move on as well. Naz Jones is going to have a big role. Can Darbo win a spot on the roster? He's going to be competing for his job with David Moore, who was a draft pick there. What's Mike Tyson got about him? And is Chris Carson going to, one, be able to stay healthy, and two, just deliver it? Everybody just seems so excited about this guy. I think John Schneider said every time Chris Carson gets on the field during minicamp, he just looks like the best player on the field. And there's just, he is a really talented football player. Can he stay healthy? That's the only concern with Chris Carson. But you look at that class on the whole, Kenny, you want to see them all have a really positive camp. There is massive potential within this roster to really, they could find some stars from within this roster. That the potential is there, but these guys have got to take that opportunity now. This is their time. They're no longer sitting on the sidelines watching the Shermans, the Chancellors, the Bennetts, the Averils, people like this. They've got to step up now, and they've got to take a step forward. And if Earl Thomas is holding out, and with Cam gone now, the safeties in particular are going to have to step up.
We know that they had a visit with J.R. Sweezy, and when we're talking about, I guess, if you only get your Seahawks information from this podcast, first of all, that's probably not a good idea. But so the news being that they did meet with J.R. Sweezy, former Seahawk, who went to the Bucs for 2 years, didn't play one of those years, released. But when you talk about there could be rising stars on this team, eliminating the veterans that we know are good, Justin Britt and Dwayne Brown, of all the other offensive linemen that is on the Seattle Seahawks right now, do you think that any of them have the potential to be a rising star?
I suppose it depends what you mean by rising star. I mean, are they going to be Pro Bowl quality? Then possibly not. I think there's the potential, Kenny, is really there to have a competent offensive line, which I think if you offered that to most people, they would accept it right now. And I think it's just, I do think the Seahawks, I never truly bought into the let's hammer Tom Cable every single year stuff that, Seahawks fans did, and felt the same way about Bevel as well. These were two guys that were part of the Super Bowl winning team and did great things for the Seahawks. But I do think it's probably time to go from a certain way of doing things to maybe more detail orientated type of way of doing things. And that seems what Mike Solari is going to bring. And if Jermaine Ifedi is just consistent, then he can be good. The problem with him is that 1 week he's dominating, he looks really good, he thinks he's taking a step forward. I mean, I think the way that he started last season was really positive, but then you see moments when the communication's bad and guys they don't even really seem to know. One guy's doing one thing, another's doing another, and you think, it's just basic stuff. The communication has to be better. It's not really about having, Dallas kind of showed otherwise, but it's not really about having 5 incredible offensive linemen who are just the best athletes or most explosive offensive lineman in the league. It's about creating a unit of those 5 people and everybody doing their job and everybody knowing what their job is and everybody executing. And if everybody does that, you're going to give yourself a chance to run the ball and you're going to give you a chance for your quarterback to throw a pass. And I do believe there is a real opportunity there, not necessarily for, necessarily Ethan Posick to become the best left guard in the NFL, or, Jermaine Ifedi to be the best right tackle or right guard or whatever, and, DJ Fluker and all this. I just think there's a chance there for Seattle to put a line out that can not get in its way, that can help the offense function. And the most important thing, Russell Wilson's going to be great. He has been every single year he's been in the league. The most important thing is to be able to run the ball better than they did last year, because that running game was just, it can't get any worse than last year. It was non-existent would be a kind review of the running game. It doesn't have to be the best running game in the league. It just needs to be a complementary running game to Russell Wilson. We need balance on that offense. If they get that, the Seahawks offense can be really good, and that's what we need to see.
Yeah, and speaking of the Seahawks offense, speaking of the running game, speaking of, Chris Carson and the people that will be around the backfield to try and improve that running game, specifically with those running backs, Rashad Penny obviously has the inside track to be the number 1, but I think Chris Carson, it's really going to have to be just a combination between those two guys. If they're healthy, that would be the expectation, at least given the draft position of Penny and the way that Pete Carroll does talk about Chris Carson. But past that, when you're talking about getting other running backs involved, you've got CJ Prosise, who, was a 3rd round pick not long ago, and JD McKissick and Mike Davis. And I'm curious too, because I wrote about JD McKissick this week, and, interesting to just consider, like, here's a guy who has always kind of like performed and been explosive when given the ball at times, maybe not the ideal player, if there's a size or athleticism or if consistency or whatever it is, has never really gotten that huge opportunity, having to play at a school that is not, considered to be, a major school, and then having to, but even though he did play for like some really good coaches, like Gus Malzahn, and was very successful in that opportunity. And then with the Atlanta Falcons, his first touch with the Falcons was a 103-yard kickoff return touchdown. He had 2 hugely explosive plays against the Indianapolis Colts with the Seahawks last year. So there's explosive plays in there, it seems, with J.D. McKissick. He can catch the ball. He's a former receiver. He seems to be able to have some plays with the running game. And when lining him up next to CJ Prosise and saying, well, which one of these guys could be the guy to sort of help the Seahawks offensively, maybe alleviate some of that pressure on the targets that they lose with Paul Richardson and Jimmy Graham, and trying to improve the running game and have different options back there. What are your thoughts on CJ Prosise and JD McKissick in terms of maybe just how in a Brian Schottenheimer offense they could become productive and useful and maybe take up some of those targets? Do you think that JD McKissick could be a guy, or CJ Prosise, both former receivers, do you think any of them could be guys that do get up there in the slot a little bit more often next season?
The problem they're both going to have is that Rashad Penny's really good at catching the football. So, and Chris Carson is as well. So that they both have that ability to play all 3 downs. And if Carson is going to have the kind of season that he seems like he's leaning towards, which is just going to be an incredible breakout year if he stays healthy, combining that with Penny, who's the 1st round pick, and you hope there's going to be sort of a 2-headed monster there. It's then hard to see how you give the other guys some snaps. Now you're going to want to limit the number of touches that Carson and Penny have, but you're already doing that by working them in as a partnership. How are you then going to get Prosise on the field? How are you going to get McKissick on the field? You've got other depth at running back with people like Mike Davis, for example, you might want to consider there. So there's a lot of possibilities for the Seahawks. I think that because of the injury issues they've had on running back over the last couple of years, they might be tempted to just, maybe they carry an extra running back next year. And I don't know how they're going to be able to do that, but just sort of keep this group together on the off chance that maybe we see a repeat of the injuries, and just covering all their bases, because they don't want to pull in running backs off the street again like they did 2 years ago. They want to have guys who they feel they can work with. And the good thing is I suppose, is that McKissick, the players really seem to like McKissick, and he seems to have that energy and that grit that really is characterized by the Seahawks team, and the players seem to gravitate towards him a year ago. And I think that's one of the main reasons, apart from the explosive plays and the dynamism, that they really wanted to make sure they kept him and maybe cut some other guys instead. And he is versatile, as you mentioned, the kickoff stuff, and he can catch the ball and has shown some explosive ability with speed in the running game. So he's a handy player to have. It's just, is he a bit of a luxury? I don't know. Can you make him to more of a mobile running back / receiver, slot receiver type guy? Is there really a defined role for him because you've drafted Penny and because you've got other guys? And where does Procise fit into all this? Procise, is he going to be the kind of guy that you move at the cut day and you swap him for somebody else at a different position? A team's maybe going to cut a defensive end, for example, and you just swap him for CJ Procise anyway. Is that the type of move that's possible here? Or do you keep him and stash him and give him another chance to prove that he can stay healthy? And that's the thing with Procise, isn't it? It's not the ability. He's clearly got the talent. It's just the injuries. And they can't keep having him 2 or 3 weeks into the season saying he's got a slight pull in his hamstring and then missing 6 weeks. It's now or never for CJ Procise. I will say, though, Kenny, Procise to me seems like the kind of guy who, the moment if the Seahawks did trade him or cut him, he'd probably go somewhere else and do what Alex Collins is doing and suddenly have this great season and everybody wondering why the Seahawks cut him. It just seems that that's the fortune that this team has at the moment. But I think to end this thought on a more positive note, the Seahawks have got quality and depth at running back. They have given themselves the best possible opportunity to try and fix the run, I believe, with the talent they've got there. And short of creating a Marshawn Lynch clone circa 2012, I don't really think they could have done much more to improve the chance to improve on the run game. They now have an offensive coordinator who will try and run the ball. They've got blocking tight ends. They've got talent at running back. They're going to try and work on this offensive line. They've got Dwayne Brown. So I think, fingers crossed, there seems to be a lot of positive signs there about being able to actually run the ball this year.
And moving over to the defense, I'm also curious too, because we talk about the retirement of Kam Chancellor, we talk about the issues with Earl Thomas. We know that Richard Sherman, Michael Bennett, and Cliff Averill are all gone. And it seems like a good opportunity to talk about one of the guys that, even as he's an all-pro inside linebacker, and I think, on the trajectory of a Hall of Famer, if he's not, getting there close already, it'll be tough. It's always a tough, especially there's only it's a position that requires an extra piece of something special to really get into that Hall of Fame level, because mostly you're racking up tackles and you need to be considered you need to be considered like the leader of the defense. You can't be that guy who in Wagner's case just happened to be surrounded by or maybe not even just happened to be, but is surrounded by really talented players. And we haven't always been able to eliminate or take away one element and say, like, well, how important is this other guy when the other guys aren't there? So it's hard now, but now, moving into 2018, Bobby Wagner does become perhaps the most important person on the Seahawks defense. And it'll be an interesting opportunity. He's not that old. He could have put in a few more years. Where do you see Bobby Wagner going in 2018? Do you think that this is the type of year where an honor like Defensive Player of the Year will be a lot easier for him to grasp because there are, not these big name stars around him as there were? Or do you think, like, maybe he will have to do more, and maybe it will be a more difficult job for Wagner to pull off when he doesn't necessarily have Kam Chancellor behind him and Richard Sherman to the side and a couple veterans up front? Not that Wagner isn't phenomenal on his own, but it is a test that he hasn't had before. So where do you stand right now with the level of importance of Bobby Wagner going into 2018?
I think he's very, very important. The one thing that he might suffer with is the loss of Sheldon Richardson more than anything else, because Sheldon didn't really provide much of a pass rush, or at least didn't have the kind of pressures and sacks that people were hoping when he was traded for. But he did keep Bobby Wagner pretty clean, and he's not going to be there anymore. That's going to be the responsibility of the defensive line. They've never put major sack numbers up front under Pete Carroll, but when the Seahawks have been at their best, they've certainly kept Bobby and KJ Wright pretty clean. So that's going to be the challenge. If they can do that, and Bobby Wagner's got the chance to make the kind of plays he did last year, then he's going to be a defensive MVP candidate. They'll need the Seahawks defense to be good, I think, in other areas as well, so that if they're winning games and they've got a decent record and the defensive statistically looking pretty good, then Bobby Wagner, of course, will be very much in contention for the defensive MVP. To tell you a little story, Kenny, during the season last year, I'm in a fantasy football league with a bunch of other journalists from the UK, and we have a little direct message chat thing going on. And I made a comment which went down like a lead balloon, which was that Bobby Wagner was one of the more underrated players in the league. Cue the hysterical laughter from the other people in this chat group saying, "What are you talking about? Bobby Wagner's not underrated." And, what a ridiculous thing to say. Everybody thinks he's really good. And I think context is important here. My point isn't that he's this under the radar guy who no one's ever heard of and never gets any credit. That's not what I mean by underrated. I think that he's potentially one of the best ever NFL linebackers and is, for me, without a doubt, the best currently. So there isn't anybody better than him. And when I say underrated, I think he really should have been a very, very legitimate defensive MVP candidate last year. That was an incredible season. And apart from a little bit of buzz during the season, it never really seemed to be a realistic proposition. And then I see this article that came out. I think Gil Brandt did some things, best linebackers in the league or something like that. I'm trying to dig it out now. And I'm sure that I saw Luke Kuechly. Here we go. I'm just bringing the piece up here now. So this was a piece published at the end of May. Gil Brandt's greatest NFL linebackers of all time. Let me. It was a top 50, Kenny. Let me just mention some of the names in this top 50. So Patrick Willis is included, and he is number 30. So Patrick Willis is the 30th best linebacker of all time, according to Gil Brandt, which, Patrick Willis was a good player, but 30th of all time. And Luke Kuechly was number 23. So 23rd best linebacker of all time, Luke Kuechly. Bobby Wagner wasn't on the list. He wasn't in the top 50. So when I say Bobby Wagner's underrated, that's what I mean. Luke Kuechly is considered the 23rd best linebacker of all time, and Bobby Wagner's not even in the top 50 by a very prominent national media personality and talking head. And it's that kind of thing. Why is Kuechly consistently considered this fantastic player who warrants that kind of praise, but Bobby Wagner doesn't? They came into the league at the same time. Bobby Wagner's outperformed Luke Kuechly. He has avoided serious injuries in the way that Luke Kuechly sadly hasn't. And look, the concussions are a major frustration for him. And I think most people will share sympathy with Luke Kuechly. When you see him bawling his eyes out on the field, you can't help but feel for the guy. You want to see him. He's a great player. You want to see him playing. But I don't understand why he gets called the 23rd best linebacker of all time and Bobby Wagner isn't even on the list. For me, Wagner's the best right now. And I think his combination of size, speed, ability to read the play, his intensity, his ability to be a playmaker at linebacker is special. And it's high time that he was considered. Brian Urlacher is going to go into the Hall of Fame this year. And Bobby Wagner needs to get some credit. He really, really, truly deserves to be talked about as a potential future Hall of Famer and one of the best linebackers of all time. That's why he's underrated for me, because he doesn't get talked about in those terms.
Well, yeah, I mean, you bring up another one of these interesting debates where it seems like at least part of the issue is the way that fans and writers and experts and analysts view players for the most part, their entire careers based on where they were drafted. Because, even the difference between Luke Kuechly going early-ish first round and Bobby Wagner going middle second round, because Bobby Wagner wasn't like a total steal. I mean, he was a steal, but like not in one of these ways of like, Tom Brady in the 6th round or Rich Sherman in the 5th round. Like when you go in the 2nd round, there's still a good chance that teams are thinking you can be a Pro Bowl, maybe even all-pro player. And there's just maybe one or two things that they don't know for sure if you're going to be able to turn that around or if you're going to be able to translate to the NFL. And it seems like Wagner being in that case, it will, for many fans who, because we can throw away Seahawks fans and we can throw away Panthers fans because they're both biased, and it's hard to really credit them totally. And I think like a lot of those other fans in the rest of the part of the country just see Luke Kuechly as the guy that was drafted higher. It's hard to take away from the statistics what they each do. And, so, and it doesn't even matter that the fact that I would say 90% of the fans never watched Bobby Wagner or Luke Kuechly play a single college snap. And they just have to form an opinion. And that opinion is going to be based a lot on things that they were told on draft day. It's the same thing that we see with Russell Wilson and Andrew Luck. There's nothing in this entire universe that says Andrew Luck is better than Russell Wilson. And yet, I would say most football fans think Andrew Luck is better than Russell Wilson. And this is based off of where they were both as college prospects going in as high school recruits. And then obviously the fact that Andrew Luck was hyped up at Stanford for a few years as a Heisman candidate. And then the way that they were drafted. And because Russell Wilson, didn't have the height a lot thought to be an NFL starting quarterback, goes in the third round. If Russell Wilson, and the only reason, and we were wrong, and everybody was wrong, for the most part, a lot of people said he couldn't do it. And it was just, they were wrong about, so Russell Wilson, in the same way of maybe like a Bobby Wagner, he is the one that suffers from the mistake that was made by everybody else. So it's like, because we know that if we redraft that draft, even the Indianapolis Colts, could the Indianapolis Colts even still draft Andrew Luck in those scenarios? Maybe, because it's like, yes, there are aspects of Andrew Luck that, of course, you would want in a quarterback, and we can throw away the injury thing and just say, as players, where do they stand? But I think a lot of the ways that fans take that position in an Andrew Luck versus Russell Wilson debate or in a Luke Kuechly versus Bobby Wagner debate is they just fall back on the fact that they had a bias and, or that they were told, that this one quarterback or this one linebacker, this one player was better than the other one on draft day by a significant margin, because, there is a significant margin between going a round or two later, and they have to stick with that. And then everything else beyond that becomes confirmation bias up until the point where they finally get to form their own opinion maybe and say like, okay, well, it's been long enough and we know enough now to say that this player is maybe better than that player. But with players that are close, like maybe Wagner and Kuechly, who are certainly close, is just always going to fall to that other side, I think. So, Rob, as someone who has covered the draft extensively, is there any way, do you think it's possible even to remove these biases that people have based on opinions that they were told by others, from, Mel Kiper to Todd McShay to Gil Brandt or Mike Mayock or whatever, to be able to say like, hey, yes, they had an opinion of where they stood as prospects. But, once we have 3 or 4 years of NFL data, we can scrap anything that was said about these guys on draft day for the most part, and understand like that we can actually now judge them as professional football players. Is there any way to rectify that, or do you even agree with that?
No, I think you make a very fair point. I think that there definitely is some of that, the draft bias of, this is a guy who was drafted here, and therefore people, I think they would just stick in the memory a little bit more. You might get a bunch of fans and go, list your top 5 linebackers in the NFL, and they're like, oh, Luke Kuechly, and he's just at the top of their minds. And one or two of them might even forget Bobby Wagner. And if you said, what about Bobby Wagner? They go, oh, yeah, that guy. Yeah, he should be in there too. That's kind of the feeling that I would get with it. I think that the reason why this happens is because the draft has become a much bigger thing these days than it has in the past. So for about 3 months, they're getting huge national attention. In the past, it might be just somebody who writes a blog or whatever, or the Mel Kiper types who know extensively about these players, or people who follow college football religiously will know all about the players coming into the league, and then you maybe get to know the players that your team have drafted, and the guys in the top 10, and the big name quarterbacks on stuff like that. But now it's different. The fans will have a very good knowledge of the player. For example, if a tight end's drafted at number 27 overall, most fans these days will have a good idea of who that guy is because they follow Twitter, they follow Mike Mayock. There's this constant NFL, information being pumped out there. There's articles to read. There's a million voices talking about the draft. You have knowledge of who these players are. So when someone like Luke Kuechly is told, you might hear in the lead up to the draft, this guy's he's just going to be a 10-year starter and he's going to be an all-pro and there's no negatives there. And, oh, look, he's had a fantastic combine. And people automatically just, and it happens with certain positions as well. It's offensive linemen, linebackers, defensive linemen, positions like that. If you're told this player's really good, there aren't many flaws, and he's had a great combine, people just instantly go, draft that guy. We need to get him. He's a sure thing. And then they come into the league, and even if these players have holes, they're not really detected because the consensus opinion, it's almost assumed that they're just gonna do what these people have said they're going to do. And if they then start playing well, then you overlook the flaws and you just kind of concentrate on the positives. And you just, people like Kuechly, all they have to do is play reasonably well, and people will always think they're brilliant because that's sort of the build-up was into the draft. And I don't think that will change because, if anything, the draft is becoming more and more of a big event. The coverage isn't just a few weeks; it's months now. College football, for me anyway, is fantastically entertaining and interesting, and you know about the players that are coming into the league, and it's just becoming bigger and bigger. So I think we're probably going to see more of this in the future than less. It is a shame because, and maybe I don't know who's in terms of changing it. I think the only thing we can do is the big name pundits in the NFL Network and on Fox and ESPN and stuff like that. Maybe just have to highlight these guys a lot more. Monday Night Football should be a presentation not just of it's this quarterback against this quarterback. Maybe it should be we get an opportunity to see Bobby Wagner today. I don't know that. Maybe that's the only way that this is going to change, that you give these players who weren't necessarily top 10 draft picks star attention and say, this is the guy. And actually, it'll be interesting to see if that's what happens with the Seahawks now, because they haven't got Sherman, they haven't got some of the other big names we've talked about tonight. Bobby Wagner and Earl and people like that are going to get the focus now. So it'd be interesting to see if maybe Bobby Wagner actually gets even more attention this year because he is one of the few big name stars left on that defense.
And to just come full circle on this, but as we wrap up the show this week, 4th of July, and before I forget, I just also want to say we debuted a theme song last week, and Rob, I don't know if you had a chance to listen to it, but
I love it. I love the theme tune, love the fact that was there, Kenny, and I think it's a great track, and I hope everybody liked it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad that you liked it. And, we put that in there. I had a great person reach out, offer to put that in there and to also, help produce the show a little bit. And I want to thank Free Dive Records for doing that. The song is by the band called Dry Reef, and it is called Swim. So you can look for Dry Reef on the internet, I think, one of those places on the World Wide Web. Dry Reef and the song is Swim. Very chill tunes. I think a great way to go into the podcast. But for the final sort of question here, Rob, I'm curious because we talk about the way we talk about prospects and how long they get judged for or with player contracts and stuff like that. How do you feel too about the fact that a prospect, can go out there and get drafted, and one of them gets drafted, like say number 2, and one of them gets drafted, say number 200, and for the next 4 years, number 200 far outplays number 2. Even in smaller cases, just the first thing that popped in my head was like, say, Deshaun Watson and Mitchell Trubisky. Trubisky is going to get paid more money than Deshaun Watson. And we can say the same thing of like, any prospect that goes later, it's like you're just going to get less money. Russell Wilson's first 4 years, not going to get paid a lot. Andrew Luck's first 4 years, going to get paid a lot. And the way that they perform does not matter. You're getting paid solely based on how teams viewed you going into the draft. And that's an interesting way to do business. And I don't know that it's wrong. I'm just saying it's an interesting thing and a way to do business and a way to be an employee is to go into it, like in the real world, there are jobs available and they pay X amount of money. And then they look at the candidates and then they say, you're a good candidate. We're going to hire you. And people know, like, what that job pays. And in this world, it's like the exact same job, but like you're getting paid based on your resume and how good of a candidate you are before you ever have done the job or had the job. All you've ever done is, let's say, go to college, just like, another, just kind of like in football. So Rob, is there any way too, do you think, to sort of like be in a scenario where players are getting paid in those rookie contracts based on the way that they perform and not on the way that they were viewed as draft prospects, which initially inevitably doesn't really matter, So, I mean, it matters in the sense that you can gauge how good you think they're going to be, and that probably will help you decide how good they're going to be, even though we know people are wrong. But like in terms of what really matters at the end of the day is how do you perform on the field? Is there anything that you think that could be done about this or that should be done about this?
That's a very interesting topic. I suppose there's a few ways I'd look at this. First of all, I think some kind of a better way of doing performance and related pay and incentives into some of these contracts possibly would be a benefit for the NFL and would not just inspire players, but encourage them and reward them in ways if they do overachieve. I also think, though, that there has to be some reward for teams who succeed in the draft. For example, the Seahawks should be allowed, in my opinion, the benefit of drafting a franchise quarterback in the third round for finding that guy without needing to do what, for example, the Redskins had to do with Robert the Griffin III, which was to trade all their picks away and go and spend millions of dollars on him. In that draft, to be able to get a much better player in the third round, there has to be some reward there. And for the Seahawks, that was, 3 years of Russell Wilson on a very cheap contract, the ability to go and build a team around him, and then win a Super Bowl, nearly win 2. And then after that time, Russell Wilson gets paid an incredible amount of money. And within the next 18 months, I imagine he's going to become the best paid player in the league, all being well. So I think there has to be some reward there for teams. I don't think it can be completely, well, do you know what? You've done really well. You've identified this guy. You've drafted him in a range where it's unconventional to find such a star player. By the way, now you're going to have to pay him and your first round pick and all this and all that. There has to be, and there is a process in place here. So the teams I don't think they're allowed to negotiate contracts with rookies until after 3 years, and then they can negotiate. That gives the team a period of 3 years to benefit from the success of drafting well. But then after that third year, there's a responsibility, and if anything, that puts pressure on teams. Now you can negotiate with this player. The player knows that the discussions have to happen at that point. It's a starting point for those discussions, whereas that might not exist if that 3 years wasn't in place there. If a player was going in after 2 years and going, give me a new contract, then the team might go, well, we've no reason to give you a new contract. We're not even going to start discussions. After 3 years of consistently good play, if Russell Wilson can then go to the Seahawks and go, look, it's time to review my pay, I'm severely underpaid here, then that's almost like a launching point for those discussions. So I like that aspect of it as well. But I think generally the topic of I don't think the NFL have got it structured too badly at the moment. I mean, I think it was worse when rookies were coming into the league, like Sam Bradford, and getting paid something like $60 million guaranteed for proving absolutely nothing, and the veteran players who had actually won in the league and succeeded and performed well were getting kind of screwed in free agency as a consequence, because teams were having to save so much money for their draft picks. It's the other way around now. The young players come into the league, the ones who get drafted early get a handsome contract, not massive money, but a decent deal that can set them up for life, and then the opportunity to earn much more in the future. And the players who are drafted later get to sort of that a year earlier, they get to get into a point where they're negotiating with their club or they're testing free agency, and it's all about the second contract. So I actually quite like the structure of the NFL situation at the moment. I know that Russell Okung said some things about guaranteed contracts at the moment. I kind of feel like, I don't really see the benefit in that. This whole aspect of teams having all this kind of control. Listen, you sign a contract and the terms are, this is what you're guaranteed, and we have an out, and that's the way it is, and people agree to these contracts and then get unhappy when teams play by the rules to the terms of the contract. I don't think that's particularly right. I think the NFL's kind of got it. My opinion, others might disagree. I think the contract situation moment is pretty good. I like the structure of it.
What if both sides got an out? What if we had contracts that said, Russell Okung, in the case of Okung, just because I just looked at his contract when I wrote about it today, 4 years, $52 million, 25 million guaranteed, but it's really a 2-year guaranteed contract with 2 option years for the team. But what if instead you just said, this is a 4-year it's structured exactly the same, except, the next 2 years are a player option as well. And Russell Okung can say, I'm at a good place right now where I know that if I opt out of this deal, I'm going to get a deal. I'm going to get a better deal and someone else can pay me. And, if Earl Thomas was in this position right now, he could say going into his last year, all right, well, I opt out. And then you have to pay me if you want to keep me. And, the team has the first right to, make an offer or whatever. But what if, is there any way to just say like, okay, if you sign a 5-year deal, we can assume that 3 years or 2 years are guaranteed. And then after that, both sides have to agree. And it's funny because my initial thought, and I'm just saying this right now for the first time, so I'm not even sure that I'm not saying it's my opinion, but my initial thought is, oh, that seems a little unfair. But why? There's no reason that would be unfair just because I'm a fan of the team and I don't want to lose Earl Thomas. Like that's not really up. That does seem hypocritical to the point where teams can make the option to release. And the teams do still have to pay perhaps some dead money on some of those deals, but it would seem that there could be some sort of thing where if we're not because the other thing too about fully guaranteed contracts that Russell Okung didn't address is it's not like you would get a 4-year, $52 million contract if they were fully guaranteed. And teams would not do that because they know the only reason that they're doing that is in the 5% chance that they go all the way to the end of the deal, but they're not going to ever do that. So teams would just be like, in the case of Kirk Cousins, it's a perfect example. He just got the 3 years of what could have been a 6-year deal. It would have been a 6-year deal with 3 years basically fully guaranteed. Instead, he just got the 3 years. So contracts would just be a lot shorter. They wouldn't get paid a lot more money, I don't think. It would just be the guaranteed side of the deal. So if you signed a deal with $25 or $30 million and the rest of the contract says $100 million, and we know how those go, really we're just talking about, will the NFL and the players ever agree to just giving out? Basically, the NFL has to give up these option years that they have that aren't really called option years. It's just whether or not they want to decide to release or honor the deal. But it does seem like fair to me to give players the same options that the teams have. Is there anything to that?
Well, it looks as if Aaron Rodgers is going to try and have that kind of a clause in his next deal. I think that you would potentially get into a little bit of a slippery slope if you start doing that, and that's probably one of the reasons why the NFL hasn't. Because what would happen then? Let's say you, at the moment, we're seeing the salary, and this is the other thing why I have little time for some of these complaints, is that the NFL have made in 2011 the salary cap was 120 million. It's nearly 180 million now. It's gone up $60 million in 7 years. Players are getting paid more than they ever have done. Many positions like guard and offensive line, the position Russell Okung plays, are getting paid incredible amounts of money compared to where they were at the start of this CBA. So that's one thing. But let's put it this way. Let's say you give a player a 2-year option. So you sign a 4-year deal, and after 2 years, he's got the option to break the contract and get out of it. If every player who got paid from then on, as soon as one player gets this, every player is going to ask for it. So let's say you put it in every player's contract. Okay, let's say that every single player gets an opt-out in their deal. They will get paid the salary cap, which we want to see happen. I imagine as fans and as players, they'd want to, will continue to increase. That means that every single year you would see potentially salaries increasing. So, for example, Russell Wilson becomes the highest paid quarterback next year. Maybe in 3 years' time, he's the 6th highest paid quarterback. And what would happen is the players would say after 2 years, right, that's it. I'm getting out my contract because, or you pay me to be the highest paid player again. And what you'd find, I think, is players and agents would be able to play the system so that they would constantly be calling and threatening teams to make them the highest paid player at the position again, or to give them a pay increase every couple of years based on how the market is evolving. And that opt-out would do that. And clubs had never stopped negotiating with players. Instead of signing up for a player for 4 years, you'd end up having to sign. You'd be practically signing for 1 year or 2 years, and then you have to go back to negotiate, and then you get another player who's coming out, and then you'd be negotiating with him, and then in 2 years' time you'd be negotiating with him again because he's going to opt out. And it just seems to me that it would create almost a situation where teams are constantly negotiating with their players all of the time, that players are getting frustrated because someone else on another team's got a little bit more than them, but I can opt out and then I can get what he's got, and then there's some other player gets unhappy, and we get more holdouts during training camp. And I don't think the structure of things at the moment, if a player goes in, the guaranteed contract thing I find very strange, because a player goes in and a team says, okay, we want to give you $25 million guaranteed. We may choose to pay you the full extent of the salary, but we may not. Are you going to sign the deal? And the players go, yes, because they want $25 million guaranteed. But then the clubs stick to the rules. There's nothing in the contract that says you can't cut me after 2, 3, 4 years or whatever. As long as they pay the guaranteed money, which is really the value of a contract, not the overall, it's the guaranteed. The language is the issue here. It's that they separate guaranteed and overall value. And players focus on those terms, as opposed to what it really should be. If you sign a $25 million guaranteed contract, it should be a $25 million contract with the potential to earn this. That's how the players and how we as fans and media should view these contracts. So that they're guaranteed to get X amount. That's your contract. If you're good enough to see the end of your contract, you might get 50 million and 60 million. That's the way that we should be viewing these things, but we never do. We always talk about $60 million with 25 million guaranteed, almost tacked on at the end of a sentence. And then when players don't get the 60 million, they wonder why they don't get fully guaranteed contracts. And I just think that's the real issue here. As I said before, I like the structure of the contracts at the moment. I like the way the draft does it. I like the fact the salary cap's increasing. Like to see players getting paid more and more, especially at positions that have been undervalued over the years, such as guard, centre, positions like that, are getting paid a lot more. I hope that the safety market recovers. I hope that the running back market recovers as well. I hope that positions across the board, I hope we don't see 2 or 3 positions hammered and the rest continue to prosper. I hope it's a balanced system, especially because players like running backs and safeties, we've seen with Kam Chancellor, put the bodies on the line a lot more than some other positions. So I hope that we see some balance and fairness in pay there. But overall, I think it's pretty cool. And I think sometimes there's an inclination sometimes, Kenny, within the NFL at the moment to be bloody negative about everything. It's like, oh God, someone's either pro-protests and therefore has to be negative about the league, or someone's anti-protest and has to be negative about the players. People are either championing and being a little bit sycophantic about player contracts, or they're telling the players to shut up and get back to work. There's always some negative angle to this. And I just wish that for once we could just sit down and go, the NFL's great. Bring on the new season. Let's look forward to it and not be constantly wringing our hands one way or the other about stuff.
I mean, yeah, you make an excellent point too about as well with the language and the way that we report contracts, annual average value, these kinds of things, who gets paid the most. And I wonder how many players take contracts just for, comparing the sizes between them and the other players and seeing the bigger number, like seeing numbers like total money or average annual value, and not maybe sometimes like even guarantee. And that's what really it comes down to, is that but yeah, the language that we call it a 5-year contract, when in reality something's really only a 3-year deal, could certainly change the perspective on that. I do think that even though all what you said is accurate and all of the teams are doing what's in the rules of the contracts, they're fully within their rights to do all of this. The players are not within their rights to do, that they are agreeing to these deals, and they are saying, like, this is what I agree. This is a deal that I think I'm okay with, including if you release me before the end of it. So that's a part of it. But I also wonder, with the amount of players who it seems to be retiring earlier in their careers, running backs becoming less and less successful in their careers long term, not very many running backs getting to that second contract like they thought they would. The fact that they just sort of fall off of a hill, like Eddie Lacy, from a guy who opened up with 2 1,100-yard rushing seasons and is not worth anything a few years later. The fact that these guys can, see their careers dwindle away. There's some player that I've been trying to think of for the last minute who has not played in like a year and a half because of a concussion.
Can I just offer a quick counter to this, though? I take all those points on board. I do think sometimes the players have tunnel vision, though. Yeah, Eddie Lacy's career's fallen off a cliff, but he's earned millions of dollars in his career. I mean, how much did he earn for the Seahawks last year? And listen, I know it's a physical game, and these players get injured. And look at Kam Chancellor, the words that he used at the end of his statement the other day. It's serious. I totally get that. But the players get paid millions. If the players think they're the only ones who are unhappy with their contract or their working situation, or feel that their boss or their organization or their corporation has them by the nads, as we might say over here, then they're mistaken. There's a lot of people in this world who do jobs that aren't anywhere near as well paid as NFL players, that do put their bodies on the line, that do get up every day and work long, hard hours, and they have a union or something like that. They're going to look after their rights. But they don't go and make demands like, I want to get out my contract and I want to do this and stuff like that. It kind of feels a little bit sometimes they want everything. And as I said, there's a kind of a, almost within the world, particularly in the West at the moment, people just constantly complaining about stuff. And I kind of just feel like, just be positive. You know, you're well paid. You are well paid. You're well compensated for a very difficult and specially skilled job. You get to play a game for a living as well. And it's great fun. And a lot of people love you for playing this game. And you get celebrity status, and you get wealth, and you get endorsements that can work alongside your contracts in the NFL. And I just wish we could just enjoy football. You know, I know there is serious stuff going on in football at the moment. I kind of just wish it could go back to being fun and a thing that we can enjoy. And I kind of wish the players would see that sometimes as well.
Yeah, I was just outlining what the players could think, and that's what I agree with you on some points too. So I do think it's interesting. Like I think also just the other thing that some players and fans, for me too, I know that what I want to see is the fact that I just see, because we have to call it two sides. We have to call it the NFL Players Association and the NFL. That's two sides. So like, it's just weird to me sometimes that we do view the players, of which there are thousands, as sort of the bad guys in some of these cases, and we excuse the owners, of which there's only 32, and and kind of just say, well, I'm going to side with them because they represent the team, the logo, the emblem, the everything. Like, for what I'm rooting for is the team. I'm rarely rooting for the player unless they're on my team, and if they're not on my team, then I hate them. So it's really siding with that team side and just saying, like, let's just say that both the billionaires and the millionaires are both greedy and probably want too much and complain too much.
So I think some owners are better than others. I mean, some owners,
well, sure, and some players are better than others.
And I mean, like, the way I kind of see it, I'm a Seahawks fan, and Paul Allen. The Seahawks might not be here if it wasn't for Paul Allen, and I respect him as a man, and I think sometimes, I think in general, the owners there are issues with owners. It's probably a discussion.
Well, there's only 32 of them, and already there's one of them that got swept up in the hashtag Me Too stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and listen, there are issues with owners. Like I said, I don't think it's a discussion we'll end up getting too deep into today. But I also think that a lot of these people, they do provide some. I mean, they provide the product at the end of the day as well, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. And I don't support Paul Allen, and I don't. I'm a Seahawks fan. I hope that the players are happy being Seahawks players. I think that's really how I view it. And if that means, and I want to see good players properly compensated. And I think the good thing about being a Seahawks fan is, I don't think John Schneider and Pete Carroll and Paul Allen will ever take the piss with a player. I think they will treat them right. I think we've seen that over the years. Some might not always agree with how they do it, but I think that we know that generally their hearts are in the right place. So I think from our point of view, I think we can feel pretty good about it.
Absolutely. Great. Well, this was a unexpected, interesting conversation way to end the show, and really enjoyed it. Lots of good points. So I think that's one thing to take away on this. We're talking about money on the 4th of July, so that's fitting as well. This has been the show. This is 3000 NFL Mock Draft, a Seahawks podcast. You can follow Rob on Twitter at Rob Staten. Go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com. We are at Field Goals or at Kenneth Arthur S. And you can check it out on fieldgoals.com. Subscribe to the show on iTunes. If you're listening to this on like Google or YouTube or whatever, you can subscribe on iTunes at Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur, and that's got to get changed one of these days. I swear. I was trying to figure it out even a couple weeks ago, and so one of these days I will figure it out, and won't that be something? That's it for this episode of the show. Come back next week for a brand new draft.